Okay, well, the college predictions did not go according to plan. It's just kind of how the way it goes. You look at sometimes you're right on the money with these picks. Other times you say Texas Tech's going to be in a good game, and they put up 0 points on offense. That was definitely unexpected. Miami shocked me. I definitely underrated or overrated Ohio State's ability to be as dominant as they were. They did have an easy schedule, but Miami's defense, man, that is no joke. So, shout out Miami. Credit to them. They played an awesome game. It happens. You pick some dumb teams, you look stupid, but that's the fun of why we do these predictions, because sometimes you're right on the money, other times you're way out of left field. For today's video, we're going to talk some fantasy football. We made some predictions back earlier in the season, and we're kind of going to go through each video and break things down as to how wrong we were and how some picks were actually correct. So obviously the beauty of kind of doing prediction videos is you don't have a crystal ball as much as I would like to be correct and have all the different divisions picked. That's just not likely. It's improbable. I did call the Bears, though. I did think the Bears had a shot to win the division. Ben Johnson, awesome coach. Jaguars, huge step up. As far as some other teams, I thought the Seahawks weren't going to be as good as they were. But this isn't for fantasy. Next week, after Week 18, we'll do kind of a recap video on how I thought certain teams would do this season. But, yeah, for now, let's jump right into it. I'm going to play a clip from This was in about 4 months ago, right before the season started, about late August. But it was a 300 curse carry video, and basically it was just about all of these running backs that had 300 plus carries, and some of it's going to look pretty bad, but others, we'll just see how it goes. There's a curse in fantasy football that nobody's talking about, and if you draft one of these running backs, it could lose you your league. It's called the 300 carry curse. Looking at past history, running backs that have 300 plus carries typically have a down season the following year. Josh Jacobs in 22, top 3 back. Then the next year, outside the top 25. Jonathan Taylor, RB1 in 2021. Then the next year, RB33. And there's many others, but this isn't new. Dating back to 2012, there were 5 running backs that hit 300 carries. Adrian Peterson, Marshawn Lynch, Alfred Morris, Doug Martin, and Arian Foster. The following season, only Marshawn Lynch stayed in the top 10 of fantasy. He was number 5. But everyone fell off. Less yards, less touchdowns, and carries. Fast forward to this year. There's Henry, Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs, and Kyren Williams. Now, there are a few outliers, and history tells us there'll be at least one that finishes inside the top 5. But 1 out of 6, that's an 84% miss rate. If somehow... So basically my point there was the big fact that all these running backs that normally have all these big carries, for some reason they don't finish as high as they have. Now, granted, a couple of those picks were clearly wrong, because if we take a look at just the top 10 running backs from this past fantasy season, most of the guys that I said that weren't going to do very good did pretty good. If we look at the PPR standings, first kind of guy, 2 guys, I guess, that I was wrong on were Bijan and Taylor. Not that I was wrong on. I figured Bijan would be a safe pick, but it's like when you look at the 2024 season, the number 1 pick being Saquon, Jahmyr Gibbs, those were the top 2 dogs in terms of how they went. Now, Bijan, being the consensus number 1 overall pick, finished 3rd. Then he finishes 2nd. Is he going to finish 1st next year? Again, there's so much speculation. But for me, what goes up must come down. And I felt like there was no way he was going to match the season that he had last year. If we take a look at Bijan's stats, I mean, he just keeps getting better and better every single season. And it's just incredible to watch Bijan play. So 272 carries, 1,400, almost 1,500 yards on the ground, 7 touchdowns. The big thing of what I was wrong on this year was his receiving game. He had 15 more catches, didn't have as many touchdowns as he did last year. Last year, 14 rushing touchdowns. But again, 15 more catches, 400 more yards, more touchdowns on the, so again, 11 touchdowns combined this year compared to 15 last year. So again, looking at Bijan, he kind of just had a good season, better in the receiving column. So again, if we're looking at all of the guys that were kind of, in this category, I think there were some couple good picks, right? If we're going to compare, all right, Kyren Williams, Josh Jacobs. Kyren obviously split time with Blake Corum. Jonathan Taylor, the RB1. Probably should have saw that coming after like that ankle injury last year. But I wasn't big on the Colts. A lot of Colts players, I didn't think the Colts were going to be very good. And then Daniel Jones has this great season. The one guy I was correct on was Saquon Barkley. I did not think he was going to have anywhere near close to what he did last year. And he finished outside the top 10. Barkley, number 14, all the way down here. Again, he didn't have a bad season, but I feel like it was a lack of play calling for Philadelphia. It wasn't necessarily his fault. But again, he had some great games. He had some duds. There were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games, 10 or less points, 7 in the championship. Just that inconsistency. But as for the other two guys, it was really Bijan and Taylor that kind of shocked me. Derrick Henry, compared to last year, 266 points. Again, just wasn't what he was last year. Henry last year, much more, in terms of those stats, at least 336 points last year, RB4 compared to the 260. Kind of just got off to a slow start, had those couple bad games, but then obviously this 45-pointer right over here, if I could move this over a little bit, the 45-point game, that was the big one. I don't know if you guys can see. Hang on, let me move it over a little more. This 45-point game right here. I mean, that was the great game that he had to last this season. However, the other few guys that we can look at, I got a lot of tabs open, but yeah, Kyren Williams didn't have as great a season as he did last year. Josh Jacobs had kind of a banged up season. Running backs always kind of tricky because injuries are a part of fantasy, and you want to try and be able to see them coming. And obviously, with that being a flawed statement, Christian McCaffrey is a big name for the injury thing. And McCaffrey obviously didn't disappoint. He was the RB1 this season, so it's like you can't really draft based off injury or scared about injury. If the player is going to be the player that you expect them to be, like Bijan, you can't draft them scaredly, And that's the kind of the reason where a lot of people took wide receiver, and I was kind of, there was a couple wide receivers that people were like, oh, this guy's going to be really good, and if I could find it, the risky picks, I was not high on Justin Jefferson. A lot of people are like, Jefferson, pretty safe pick. The quarterback situation was way too sketchy. Now you see a couple of these other names like Achane, and the only reason Achane was on there was because of the riskiness of his calf injury in the preseason, if anyone knows any of that business, and I was scared, and obviously Achane, very, very consistent season as the RB5, and was just pretty consistent all season. If we look at all his game logs, 16, 16, 26, 16, 17. I mean, he rarely had games under 15 points. Only 2 games under 15 points this season. So great fantasy season from him. Just a little off the mark from my personal standpoint. But we'll get rid of the 300 carry, the curse carry. As far as some other ones, RB landmines, was not high on Devon Achane. Probably go 2 for 3 from this list. Achane being the RB6. My kind of logic was he wasn't going to be the RB6 because of this injury. He might miss a couple games. We already know he has an injury history in the past. His rookie year, he went down. But again, the upside was there. I just didn't like the first round of, you're taking him as a first-round pick, and you're expecting him to be this guy out of the gate. And he was. So Kyren Williams was the RB12. I liked Kyren a lot coming into the year, but I just got more and more skeptical with how the season was going to turn out. And clearly, it was taken over the fact that Blake Corum had a lot more value than we thought. So Kyren Williams, RB9, again, he did outperform his ADP, but not what he was last year. 252 points in 2025. If we look at 2024, he was a lot, well, not a lot, but he was definitely a little more consistent in terms of the 20 more points. So I guess, Kyren didn't have necessarily a bad year, but he was on a landmine. So yeah, that one was a miss as well. But yeah, looking at this past season, we're just going to keep going. You guys can be the judge in the comments. I'm going to try and, argue why I thought the things that I did. And, I feel like for this channel and the Big Z Breakdown, sometimes you have takes that are just out there and they're a lot crazier than people want them to think. And sometimes you look like a genius. Other times you look like a fool. And, obviously, you want to look correct more than not, but obviously it's very difficult. I was high on Ashton Genty, thought he was going to be awesome this year, and clearly he did not live up to expectations. The offensive line for the Raiders was just abysmal. I'm interested to see where they put him in the rankings next year, because if he's outside the top 10, I would think about it just considering how the offseason goes and what things are going to happen. But Nico Collins, he was a pretty safe bunch of wide receiver. He had a top 10 season. I believe he was number 7. Yep. Number 7 right down here. And again, wide receiver was such a weird position this year, because you look at the top guys, Puka, JSN, Amon-Ra, Pickens, Jamar Chase. A lot of those first-round wide receivers didn't really pan out. You had a lot of them. Malik Neighbors got hurt early. Justin Jefferson, a crowd favorite that finished way too far down the list. CeeDee Lamb, I know he got hurt, but he was not, anything of what he was last year, or when you drafted him in 2023 to be the wide receiver 1 that you thought he was going to be. AJ Brown, really inconsistent, but the real value in all these guys: Amon-Ra, great first round pick; Puka Nacua, great first round pick; JSN, a sneaky, I believe, 3rd or 4th rounder. Jamar was pretty safe year round. But looking at this season, the sleepers, where you won this league: Chris Olave, number 6. He was going late in drafts. Cortland Sutton, middle of the pack. But Wan'Dale Robinson, I know nobody thought Malik Neighbors was going to get hurt, but wide receiver was so very interesting this year. And if you picked up, Michael Wilson off the waiver wire when Marvin Harrison went down that week, I was like, he's going to go crazy. Didn't think he was going to get 37, but obviously, or 33 when the week he kind of broke out and had that consistent stretch of helping people get to the playoffs. I was high on Emeka Ibuka. I was high on Matthew Golden. Matthew Golden, a huge disappointment. Ibuka had a great stint for the first half of the season, and then Mike Evans came back, Jalen McMillan came back, Chris Godwin came out, and he was just kind of phased out of the offense. Like, again, with the logic of the rookies in the first-round picks, you think that they draft a guy like Teteroa McMillan early to utilize him, to give him 100 targets a year. Instead, I don't know actually how many targets McMillan had. We could actually take a look at his game log really quickly, as he had, 116 targets, 66 catches. But yeah, they need to find better ways to get him the ball, especially the Packers. The Packers just ticked me off, because it's like, hey, you drafted Matthew Golden for first-round pick for the first time in, 20 years, and you barely utilize him. Christian Watson comes back, just steals over the wide receiving room, and it was just a really bizarre year for wide receivers. I mean, there was, a lot of injuries for, later round picks that people had hoped for, like Ricky Pearsall, who was just pretty much hurt the whole season, and you have the same thing with running backs in Bucky Irving, who I was really high on. But let's get through a couple of these other ones here. Just talked about wide receiver. I had so many high hopes for Ibuka, Golden, Keon. Keon, just an absolute bust. I don't know if he will live up to anything in the NFL. I was big on Calvin Ridley. I think a lot of people were expecting him to do something this season with a new rookie quarterback, and then he just got hurt. He wasn't really a part of the offense and just kind of, again, fell apart. McMillan wasn't a terrible pick. He definitely outperformed his ADP. Ibuka outperformed his ADP. Golden, you could say 2 for 4 there. We talked about the landmines. Definitely Kyron, I think, was a miss. Achane was a miss. The only one that was good was Barkley. As far as a lot of me hating, there was definitely a couple good things. Dak Prescott to George Pickens. I definitely spelled his name wrong now that I look at it. But looking at the one thing that I probably got right this year was Dak Prescott. I was so high on Dak, it was not funny. And if we look at the rankings, Dak Prescott finishes as a top 5 fantasy quarterback. If you're watching the Wayne 15, First and 15, go to your Roku, Fire Stick, download the Wayne 15 Plus app. We do a show every week. It's called First and 15, fantasy football. Early in the season, I bet Ethan Dallin, one of our reporters, and said, hey, Dak Prescott's going to be a top 5 fantasy quarterback. Again, a very outrageous take, a very out there take, considering the other players that were there. Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow. Again, we're not factoring in injuries here, but sometimes that's just how things go. Over Jalen Hurts, over Baker Mayfield. I mean, Dak Prescott was ranked as the QB 10 coming into the year, and I got him in every single one of my leagues. That was my QB 1 that I wanted to take. I backed him up with probably a Jordan Love, or a Bryce Young or a CJ Stroud. Definitely the late round backup that you needed was Drake May, clearly the probable MVP of the season. Trevor Lawrence definitely was on my radar as well. Stafford, I was a little bit out on the back injury. Caleb had a good bounce back year. Very very streaky. He had a lot of good games here, you could see. But then obviously 5, 12, 10, 10, 15. He had some good games, some bad games. Pretty solid overall in the year, though, QB6. Got trains. But yeah, as far as the QB stacks go, a couple of them weren't great. Young to McMillan, Stroud to Collins, Dak to Pickens was the one good one I had. Jordan Love to Matthew Golden just absolutely sunk a lot of people's ships. Allen to Coleman, that didn't work out. Obviously, you tried to take a chance. And, for as bad as this year looked, last year I was very high on a lot of the rookies, Brian Thomas, Ladd McConkey, and those guys carried me to a fantasy championship last year. So sometimes it's your year, sometimes it's not, sometimes you're lucky, sometimes you're not. It's half skill, half luck. So as we get into the back half of this video, let's look at a couple more of the bright moments. Into Sam Laporta. So let's go ahead. This was about Brock Bowers not being the tight end one on the season. I didn't trust it. So this was right on the money. Do not draft Brock Bowers in fantasy football this year. You're going to regret it if you do. Now, don't get me wrong. Bowers is a great talent. I was actually on him last year going in round 10. But this year, in the second round as the tight end one off the board, that's a massive risk. When you take a guy in round 2, you're locked into starting him every single week. Look what happened to Sam Laporta last year. The tight end 1 still had a solid season, but finished as the tight end 8. That's not paying off for the draft price. The reason Bowers exploded last year was volume between 2 backup quarterbacks just hitting the security blanket across the middle, plus the Raiders had no run game. Now this year, you have a new coach in Pete Carroll, a new quarterback in Geno Smith, a loaded run game with Ashton Genty, and you're telling me Bowers is going to do the same thing as last year? I'm not buying it. You're asking him to repeat elite numbers with a coach who historically doesn't feed tight ends. The best tight end with Pete Carroll was Jimmy Graham, finishing as the tight end 4 in 2016. But that was with Thomas Rawls running the football. So yes, Brock Bowers is still a great talent, but his ADP in round 2? That's a trap. The risk is way higher than people realize. Draft him, and you'll be disappointed. Do not draft Brock Bowers in. Well, I think that worked out. One of the takes that was probably spot on. I'm actually curious how he finished on the season, because I did do, like, the one thing I do love to do is kind of just predict things to happen, and his stats for the season, which is kind of funny. So 64 catches, 680 yards, and then in the Bowers video, what was my prediction for the season? 72 catches, 800 yards, 5 touchdowns, 64 catches, 700 yards, 7 touchdowns. So it was pretty solid in terms of what I say. I said like 8 more catches. I said about 130 more yards. I said 2 less touchdowns. I mean, that's a pretty solid prediction. Obviously, he did miss time early in the season. He only played 12 games, I believe. Let's go ahead and look at that, actually, because Bowers definitely was hurt for a decent amount of the year. As far as his game log, he played 12 games. So definitely if he played the full season, it would have been working out better. But I was somebody who did not like to draft any tight ends in the first round, any tight ends early for that matter. And was that a mistake? Trey McBride had a season for the ages, and sometimes you got to take the chance on a third-round pick for tight end. And clearly, if you drafted Trey McBride, I mean, that was pretty much a season winner. He put up a dud in the fantasy was that semifinals the week before the finals, so I guess that's the championship week, whatever it was. The week before the championship, he put up a dud, probably his first real dud of the season. But yeah, my philosophy on drafting a tight end later, and we'll get to the Tyler Warren take, but my thought process with Mr. Brock Bowers was the fact that if you're going to take a tight end round 1 and 2 and expect him to put up the numbers that he did last year, that's kind of crazy, because to consistently perform and go above and beyond for your numbers from last year, it's going to be very difficult. Now, McBride clearly outshot his season from last year. You have certain outliers that are going to be great, but even George Kittle, who had a solid year at 236, he didn't get anywhere near close to his point total. He was at what? I know he got hurt again, but 153. That's 100 less than last year. So, again, more likely than not, you're going to have seasons that after a great year, you're not going to have as good a year as, just for stats and reasons of, from research that I've done, that's kind of been the philosophy. And for certain players, they have worked out. Other things of injuries and Bucky Irving getting hurt, that definitely didn't help. But for the guys that I was high on, again, wasn't the best year for fantasy, but that's kind of why we're talking about it. That's kind of why we're recapping it. That's kind of what we're looking at. And clearly, wasn't really thinking about Chris Olave, but this is like the beauty of fantasy and Fantasy Pros. Shout out Fantasy Pros. They just have all the information laid out. Now, what I would love to look at is the preseason rankings in terms of how they have, Ashton Genty RB5 and then he finishes RB12. And just looking at all of those kind of stipulations of where people finished, George Pickens was like, wide receiver 30 on the year? I mean, he finished top 5. He was clearly one of Dak Prescott's go-to targets, and that was just a volatile offense where it was just pass. But yeah, as for wide receiver, didn't think about Olave, and that's kind of where, I, as a creator, look at next year and like, okay, where did I go wrong? How can certain players play into this factor? And yes, I'm already starting to think about stuff for next year, but the problem is we're looking at next year and the offseason hasn't happened yet. The offseason is a big plus or minus to how things operate, and obviously I probably won't talk about fantasy again until maybe the offseason, probably heading into the draft, and, next April is definitely going to be a big factor, unless anybody wants me to do another recap video on, more in-depth things of all I've done. Let's talk about some duds. Caleb Johnson. Oh my gosh, I really thought the rookie from Iowa was going to show out and as a 3rd, 4th round pick for the Steelers. Instead, they love Jaylen Warren. They love Kenneth Gainwell. And I just, again, was a big swing and a miss on the rookies this year. I was so like, okay, rookies were the vibe last year. Clearly not the vibe this year. And it just didn't work out for the rookies. Rookies won me a championship last year. Sometimes you ride the hot hand, and then all of a sudden it just do not perform up the standards. The one guy I did get right was Javonte Williams, being the veteran that he was. I mean, the Cowboys ran him the rock. He finished as the RB11. That was a great pick in terms of a zero RB strategy. Chase Brown finished his season high with this last, Chase Brown had an amazing, playoffs if you look at that. But yeah, it was a good year for Mr. Javonte Williams, finishing ahead of Josh Jacobs, who was taken first, second round. And even if you had Jacobs, I feel like it was a letdown for the playoffs that he put up. Yes, he had a good first round, but then after that, the knee was just bugging him, and he tried to fight through the pain. It was just, sometimes it was tough. Another tough pick, R.J. Harvey. The running backs were so weird this year because I really liked the rookies. Omari and Hampton just didn't work out. He had the injury. Travion Henderson, even towards the end of the year, he had a couple good games to, keep his season alive. I mean, he was a potential drop candidate for the weird games that he had, 7, 12, 4, 4, like just not involved at all. And then he had a couple breakout games when Ramondre Stevenson went down, but then Stevenson was still utilized when he came back in. So very interesting season on his part. Zach Charbonnet, kind of a touchdown merchant, if you will. Woody Marks, Stevenson, Kyle Monangai, definitely not a bad option later in the season. Scatterbo, what a tough pick that was. Just had a great first half of the season, just unfortunate with that ankle injury. Bucky Irving, somebody who I was very high on this year, but just the injuries. I would say Bucky's probably a good candidate to do well next year. The problem is with the Bucs offense, I don't know how that's going to look if they keep Todd Bowles around. So just a lot of question marks. Travis Etienne, a lot of question marks there coming into the year with Tank Bigsby, and then they trade Bigsby. Bashal Tutin is a good candidate to step up. And then Liam Cohen just loves Etienne's value. I mean, he's a great shifty runner. You question these certain things, and wow. I mean, Etienne, great late round draft pick who panned out. I don't know where Chuba Hubbard is on this list, but he was like a 3rd, 4th round pick. Kenneth Walker, some people were really high on. That didn't work out. So again, just a wild season on how certain things panned out. But if we're going to go through kind of the rounds really quick, this was my Tyler Warren take. I was really big on Tyler Warren being like the Brock Bowers of this year. And it was looking good for half the season until he absolutely had one of the worst second halves of the season, and just crazy. Because Warren was up there with McBride by like week 6, 7, and then he just fell flat. So if we're looking at Warren, I mean, he had a good start to the season, and then again, after week 9, after week 10, after the bye, 9, 11, 3, 4, 6, 8, 9. I mean, that is just very, very unfortunate. So, weird season for tight end. Clearly, McBride just jumped everyone. I feel like a lot of people are going to be on Pitts next year. Is Kelsey going to retire? Ferguson had a good first half, was the RB, tight end one for a while. Clearly, your first round pick needed to be Christian McCaffrey. Your second round pick, probably Josh Allen. But again, there was a lot of value at quarterback, and I think there's a lot of value at quarterback every year. Drake May, Matthew Stafford, Trevor Lawrence, guys that were going in the teens, even Caleb Williams, those were kind of the big value at quarterback. You didn't need Allen, but again, he was very, very good in terms of his 37 points. But Drake May, my point being, not far behind. If you got Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor, guys like that in the first few rounds, as good as Bijan was, Christian McCaffrey clearly the risk it, biscuit pick. He played awesome. And then as for wide receiver, I was right going 0 wide receiver in the first round. I feel like it's just the guys that I picked for value. It was not George Pickens. It was not Chris Olave. It was the rookies like Emeka Ibuka that I thought were going to step up. Cortland Sutton was one of my guys I got in the middle rounds. Zay Flowers I was out on. Stephon Diggs I didn't know what to expect. Just a really weird season. Tedero McMillan had a solid year. But again, it's not all about rankings. It's not all about, who finished first. It's about who performed in the playoffs. And Puka Nacua, a 15-point championship, probably cost a couple people the chip, and it costed me. I had McCaffrey and Puka down to the wire in one of my one leagues in a sleeper league, and I lost by like 5 or 6 points because I started Rico Dowdle instead of RJ Harvey, and it was just a dumb decision by me. Had Falcons defense and Puka Nacua going against Bijan, and Bijan just absolutely torched. And that's the thing with McCaffrey. McCaffrey was really good, consistent all year long. But if you had Bijan for the playoffs, look at those 3 games, 30, 30, 40. That is what kind of won you your championship. Or if you had, say, Bijan and Chase Brown as a couple first and second round picks, he had a great couple games as well, Chase Brown. So I'm going to wrap this up. Clearly had a couple good takes, couple not so great takes. The running backs this year, I was just, oh my gosh. Braylon Allen was high on. He got hurt. Jordan Mason, high on him. The Vikings offense just looked depleted. Trey Benson, he got hurt. Will Shipley. Saquon, clearly, that was a handcuff kind of thing. Ollie Gordon didn't really, Kyle Monunga, though, that was a good one. But yeah, it was just a crazy weird season. As far as the other quarterbacks I was on, here we are with Caleb Williams was a great pick. Dak Prescott, another name I was huge on. There's my face. Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, kind of duds there. But yeah, that was kind of the fantasy recap for the season. 27 minutes long. Hopefully it was as entertaining as it was for me watching these takes. It was definitely, it's hard to look back on them and just take it on the chin because some of them were just clearly way off, but then a couple of them were kind of on the money with Brock Bowers and the Dak Prescott one and just a couple of those ones. But clearly we got some work to do in the offseason. It's going to be fun, fantasy, offseason. Can't believe the season's already over. Week 1 to Week 18, just crazy season. We're going to have playoff predictions for the NFL next week. We're going to probably recap all of our record predictions and things of that nature. Excuse me. So thank you everyone so much for watching. This has been Mike Zanetti, the Big Z Breakdown. Leave a comment if you're new, hit that sub button, and we will see you in the next episode. Peace out.